Welcome to the Marcus Oldham College AgTalk podcast. This series of podcasts focuses on the business management of Australian farms. G'day, my name is David Cornish. I am the Director for the Centre for the Study of Agribusiness at Marcus Oldham College, an independent tertiary institution that has been producing the next generation of Australian farm managers for over 50 years. The focus of the podcast is to look at the question of what makes a farmer successful. Is it just luck, or do good farmers make their own luck through hard work and utilising good business decision-making processes? I hope you enjoy the discussion. It's my pleasure today to welcome Nigel Kerin to the AgTalk podcast. Nigel is the founder and director of Kerin Poll, which is a 3,950 hectare family farm operation based at Yeovil in central West New South Wales. He states on his website that his primary role is to strategise the development of Kerin Poll genetics, not only offering genetics but mentoring clients to reach their full genetic potential of the product they are purchasing. However, I reckon by the end of this podcast you realise this is only one of the many things that takes up Nigel's thinking on a day-by-day basis. Welcome, Nigel, and thanks for coming on the podcast. How's it looking up your way?
Thanks for having me. How's it looking up home? It's been the land of milk and honey for about 13 months, but the cork's been put in the honey pot.
I hear it's gone a bit dry there. Tell me, you got any of these mice?
Don't talk about it. I found my Ugbirds, put them on for the first time this winter, and it was full of dead mice.
Oh, so, Jesus.
Yeah, so Ugbirds went in the bin.
No, I'm hearing some dreadful stories about people who are just finding them in their bed and all things like that. So, yeah, it's not pleasant.
We had a bloke stay at home 2 nights ago and he left his boots out the front. And the next morning they got in and eaten all the orthotics that are in for his heel.
Yeah.
So he was pretty happy. So.
Yeah, not good. Okay, Nigel, we better go and talk about the serious stuff. I think what would be good for the listeners is maybe just a bit of a background of how the business has got to where it is today and where it started.
Good question. I guess if you go right back, left school at 14, did year 9, and that was about it. And then went jackarooing, and I always knew I was going to be in ag. There was never any other business but ag for me. Always had a hunger for making money. Started off at about 5 or 6 year old with chooks. Eggs, selling eggs on the school bus running, selling eggs after church on Sunday, and it grew from there. So I went into the jackaroo, went through that period, and then went to 2007, did our succession, which I think I was 42-year-old then, and me and Kate started our business called Kerin Agriculture. And that's when the learning really started. So basically from 14 to 40-year-old did no learning other than the learning of hard knocks, I guess you could say, out in the paddock. Then suddenly realised that we were now business owners and the poo actually hit the fan then. And I remember one of our biggest anxieties was, and I remember this was written down, our biggest anxiety in the business when we started it was we knew a lot about farming and absolutely nothing about running a business. Very good farmers, but very poor business people and didn't know our numbers, et cetera, et cetera. So that was what's created the learning. And since about 40-year-old, it's just been continuous learning. And one of the big things that's come out of learning, the more you pay, the more you listen for learning.
Yeah.
So I now value learning. If they're charging a fortune to do a 1 or a 2 day school, and that's a good thing.
Again, it's really interesting because you make a really good distinction. I think it's important that we think about this as people involved in the industry. You talk about you've done up to 44, you learn how to be,
Slave.
Work in a business.
Slave would be a good word.
Yeah, and then you had to learn what it meant to run a business.
Yeah.
You mentioned numbers. Was there other things that you suddenly thought, oh, shit, I've got to get my head around this stuff?
Well, it's only in the last 5 or so years we've actually learnt what the really important part is to running a business, and that is communications and learning how to do business with people has without doubt been the biggest learning. If you could have fast tracked that as a 28, 32-year-old, God knows where we'd be today.
And so let's pick up on this point of communication, because I imagine when we often talk about communication, we talk about working within the business, but I would have thought, knowing a little bit about your history, and I think it's important that people understand that, is that your ability to communicate with, I hate using the term, but I'm going to use it, stakeholders or people that you are dependent on, was also just as critical as the people who are working in the business. Am I off track there, or is that a fair call?
You see, when we started Kerin Poll, and I'll just quickly drift there.
Yep.
That's only 11-year-old, that business.
Yep.
And what we learned is people don't buy bulls, people don't buy rams, people buy people.
Yep.
And we were raised in a culture where doing business was very much revolved around win-lose. Someone had to win, someone had to lose in business negotiations.
Mm.
And what I've learned is that if everything you do in ag, when you do business with someone, you have a win-win mentality where both sides win, then my God, it's easy to do business and everyone wants to do business with you.
And I think let's work on that, because I think some people think about a win-win. Well, how can you do that? You're either paying too much for a product or you're not paying enough. But I think what they're losing sight of is this concept around value.
Yeah.
And I think the more that we can, as farmers, can think about this concept of value, what's in it for me and what's in it for you, the more likely that we're going to have win-win situations. If we don't take that thinking to a discussions, well then, we are going to have a win-loss and someone's not going to be happy.
There is no fair trade in free.
Yep.
And that's a real, I'll let that one sink in. There's no fair trade in free. And the culture we were raised in is very much one of lowest price is best. And really these days, I don't give a bugger about price anymore. And I see that as a handbrake in a lot of businesses. And it's very much a culture in agriculture where there's a focus on this, a real strong focus on controlling direct costs.
Yep.
And I really struggle with it, because what I see is for every $1 million of sales in a livestock business, be it sheep or cattle, you'll have about $300,000 of direct costs, which is a 70% gross margin. So if I get out of bed on the 1st of July, the beginning of this financial year, and I say, right, I'm going to absolutely drive down direct costs by 10% this year, what does that actually give you? For every 10% saving on $300,000 of gross sales, direct costs, it buys you 30 grand.
Yep.
What does 30 grand give you? Well, you can buy a Honda side-by-side like we use on the farm, fully decked out with everything. They cost about 30 grand by the time we build or spec them up. But does that change your life? And the answer is no. But the day I get out of bed on the beginning of a financial year and say, this financial year, I'm going to increase my turnover by 10%, what does that give you? A 10% increase in turnover is 100 grand. Now, the first question I'll ask when I'm going through this with anyone really is, what does 100 grand buy you? And my answer to that is quality of life.
Yep.
And 100 grand can buy me a really, really, really good labour unit.
Yep.
Which includes super workers comp and all that sort of stuff. And then that allows you, the CEO, the owner of the business, to actually get up in a helicopter and look down on that business to see where the low-hanging fruit is in that business. And that's where turnover starts to really multiply itself out. Because a really successful businessman in agriculture told me about 5 years ago, Nigel, the more people I employ, the more money I make. And that sort of hit me between the eyes with a ballpoint hammer, because that's not really the culture I see. The culture we see in ag is very one about labour's expensive, labour's hard, this is tough, that's bad, where nothing could be further from the truth. if you have labour, it allows the CEO of the business, the owner of the business, to actually find where the low-hanging fruit is in that business. Because a lot of businesses I see are that busy being busy, a lot of them don't even have time to make money.
It's really interesting you say that. I was fortunate enough to be a part of a facilitation of bringing leading-edge farmers from both New Zealand and Australia together, and some of them were in the sugar industry, some were in the cotton, dairy. So industry wasn't a factor, because the industry, they're across totally different factors. And I always like to ask the question, what do you think made you successful? And being farmers, they're usually very evasive about sticking their head up, which is unfortunate, I think, in the industry. But anyway, we got chatting in the end, and one of them actually said, listen, David, I'm thinking about this question you're asking me, and I think it was a day that I stopped working in the business rather than looking and started working on the business, was the day that I doubled my asset value and then tripled it. In other words, using the sort of, I think it was Roosevelt matrix, he said, what I started to focus on, what were the important issues but weren't the urgent issues. And what he was talking about, that was strategic planning.
That is so true. Where your focus lies, when you pull those boots on of a morning and walk out to the Hilux ute, will determine what happens in that business as far as profit. And that's a big thing, that managing headspace and managing the chatter in the back of your head, that negative chatter, that become a really big part of getting ahead, was managing that negative chatter in your head and just learning how to turn it off.
Yeah.
Where my thing now is, what do I have to change to make something work better?
Yeah. So what made you get into the stud business?
That was really, it's completely different to most people. It's, for me, I looked at two things: low-hanging fruit and the best way of selling grass. They were the two things you could say about the stud industry.
Yeah.
So I'll explain them. Low-hanging fruit was, what does the merino industry have to do to compete against all the other breeds? And the two things they had to do was have a heap of lambs and grow like buggery to compete against the crossbred terminals.
Yep.
We already had the fertility part. We'd had a high fertility flock for basically decades. And that was driven by, we're up to, I think this is the 26th year of wet and drying, where every single ewe that doesn't raise a lamb is culled out of the flock and sold. And that is one of the things that creates a culture within a flock of fertility. And that's actually, it's inbuilt into that flock. The other one was, if you were going to have a really successful seed stock business, and that's an incredibly good way of selling grass to a high valued animal unit. So the way the stud's set up at the moment, the stud has its direct costs, and our overheads sit around that 1.3 million a year. So the stud pays the overheads of the business, and it also pays the direct costs of the stud. And the cash that comes into our business comes from usually cattle trading.
Yep. So I'll come back. I want to come to that because there's some really good thinking about why that cattle trading business that I really want to spend some time on. So, but again, coming back, what I really like, so, the business thinking that went into that stud, because you weren't just looking at it and say, I like sheep, and, I like sheep. It was about, or that I like the merino. It was about, okay, how do I make this business unit add value to what I grow and what comes to me? So taking control of the attributes and saying, well, this is the business that I can maximise my value and my labour, for want of a better word, from. Would that be a fair call, Nigel?
Yeah, all of those, and one other major important thing. We had a climate that was rapidly changing.
Yep.
And the most valuable commodity we had was rainfall. How do we get really good at converting sunshine and rainfall into grass and then converting that into the highest valued product that we can from that grass? And everyone knows that sheep businesses are highly profitable.
Yep.
But take it another step up into a successful growing seed stock business, then that adds a completely different profit dimension into it.
Okay, so here's my problem with the merino industry, and I'm going to say this because as a young gun, when I was much younger than I am now, I was fascinated by the merino sheep. I loved it. I couldn't get about the merino industry. But I've also got a banking background. So what I was looking for, and remember, mate, this is going back to the 1990s, I was looking for performance. And I'd go to Sheep Vention, and I'd be looking at the merinos there, and I'd be going, they look good, and frame seems fine, but what do they actually deliver? What can they actually achieve? What animal should I pick? How's it going to have a genetic impact on me? And when I'd ask this question to some members of the merino industry, I'd be going, that sort of almost pushed me aside like I was some kind of idiot. What's fascinated me in the last 15 years, with some merino breeders, that's changed significantly, hasn't it? We talk about this concept around the modern merino. So when you were looking for those features, again, that was probably going against the grain of what the merino industry was talking about at the time, wasn't it, Nigel? I mean, it's easy to look in hindsight, but at that point, it was sort of a little bit unpopular, wasn't it?
Yeah. Just to rewind a bit, the reason why you were pushed aside is they simply couldn't answer the question.
Okay, yeah.
The question is, they couldn't actually give you any data other than micron and fleece weight on those animals. That was it. That's as good as it got.
Oh, and the nose was soft.
Oh, yeah, and bloody wrinkly muzzle and blah, blah, blah. And the merino industry has evolved at such a rapid pace. And now, driven by ASBVs, genomics, data, measuring, we are now, the successful studs are now in a data-driven war for who wins it. For 11 years that we've been having on-property sales, every year I put a flip chart up of what I think the 30 leading studs will be on the east coast of Australia, what I think their averages will be, grosses will be, and then we finish the year off, and then I look at it. And then I look at why is it that this stud's going really well? Why is it this one's staying the same? And why is it this one's losing sale and disappearing off this flip chart? Last year, I think the top 10 grossing sales, 9 of them used data.
Mm.
Out of the top 10 semen sellers, 10 out of 10 use data.
Is that
so?
The customer's saying something there, isn't it?
Well, you're either going to have to adapt or die. But the one thing that really did come out of looking at 10 years of trends on this flip charts was the more ribbons you win, the less rams you're selling. And this year, last year we had so much change from COVID. We didn't do a single field day. This year, all the field days are open, and guess what? We're not doing a single field day.
Yep.
Because the guts of a seed stock business, be it sheep or cattle, is in the females.
Yep.
And you'd see people come and choose to move to another stud without seeing a single female from that stud. Mm. So my thing is now I would rather spend a day, half a day, going through our business in the office with someone, maybe a potential client, then jump in the ute, go for a drive around the farm, look at everything out in the paddock, nothing shedded, look at the ewe lambs of the lambing, look at the ewe base of the stud, have them in yards ready to roll, and actually see if the landscape and the animals match what they saw on the balance sheet back in the office.
Yep. Because
guess what? If you can't get them to add up what you saw in the office and what you see in the landscape, you're probably a good judge.
Yeah.
You'll usually find that what you see in the balance sheet of the business and the P&L sheet will be mirrored out in the paddock.
Yep.
And the thing with merinos now, once you get that high fertility, fast growing merino, and you've got, and add that resilience into it that we're starting to really stack into merinos nowadays with genetic fat and muscle, you've got this really well-rounded animal that can exist and live in nearly all environments.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think it's probably one of the most, and people might disagree with me because of where wool prices are, I don't know, but I think it's one of the most exciting times to be actually being in the merino industry, just because of the information we've got and the ability to manipulate our flocks.
The word manipulate is where that is the word. We can change these flocks literally in one cross.
Mm. And
the difference is, you'll always know the difference because the guys that have come across to a modern merino, and I'm not talking about ours, I'm talking about a modern day merino bred with those traits we've been talking about, they can't wait to show you the F1s.
Nigel, I want to move on to something else now, and just want to talk about this concept around price versus value, I suppose, in a way. If you look at prices for stock now, a lot of people would be going, oh, can I actually afford to pay that amount for a cow or a sheep or anything like that? You've got a slightly different thinking on that, and I think it's really an interesting concept about how to think about prices and value.
Yeah. Once again, learning how to work out the price difference between price and value is another school that I've done. It's KLR marketing. I've done it 4 times now.
Yep.
And through that, we get spreadsheets. So this is whether you're breeding or trading. It doesn't matter. You've got to put your breeding animals through a spreadsheet to see if you can take them to the next level of profit with the grass you got.
Yep.
What's really crazy about what's going on in Australia at the moment is we have record prices. And the first thing people do is look at price. But you don't actually make money out of sheep or cattle. You make money out of the grass. So now, if we're selling a steer, say a black steer into a feedlot, we're talking $4.65. So for every kilo you put on, it's $4.65.
Yep.
And if I wind back to, say, I don't know, 5-6 years ago, I might have been buying a steer for $3 and selling him into a feedlot for $2.80.
Yep.
Every kilo I put on was $2.80, not $4.65. See how the earning potential of this farm has nearly doubled?
Yeah.
The potential of the grass. But what's happened to my direct costs? My direct costs haven't moved that much. So back then I might have been paying $1,000 for a black steer, 320 kilo.
Yep.
Now I might be paying $2,000. What's the difference between a $1,000 black steer and a $2,000 black steer in the cost of carry?
Yeah.
It's $13.
Yeah.
It's $13.
Okay. Yep.
That's the difference between the interest bill on $1,000 and $2,000. Are we going to have an argument about whether they're dear or not based on the fact that we're arguing over $13, the difference in the interest bill? Because all the other direct costs are the same. Yeah, your commission will be a bit dearer if you're using an agent because the value of the animal's basically double what it was 5, 6, 7 years ago.
Yep.
But most of the direct costs have stayed the same.
I suppose that the key to that is that you're basically almost selling the beast before you buy it. In other words, you've got your prices locked in. Is that a fair call?
Well, what fear and greed, we're fearful of buying them, but the feedlotters are fearful of not having supplies. The processors are fearful of not having supplies. So when the cattle market's absolutely booming, and same with the lamb market, we don't get high forward prices or high prices to kill cattle or go into a feedlot unless the market's actually booming as well.
Yep.
So the great thing about high prices, it's created fear for the farmer and it's created fear for the feedlotter and the processor. And both of them want to cover risk by doing forward pricing. They're buying and we're selling at a forward price. So both of us are covering our risk, and so we should be if we're interested in doing good business.
Yeah, and I think that, that's the important thing is about, when you say about that spreadsheet, you're interested in the margin at the end of the day.
I just look at the margin broken down on a DSE basis.
And, you're not after, I don't care whether I get the highest price. What I want to do is make certain I'm getting the best margin I can.
Exactly.
And I see too many farmers saying, well, I didn't sell because I thought the market was going up. And I'm going, but you'd locked in a margin where you were going to make money and you walked away from it on the off chance that you might make a few bucks going into the market, in the sale yard.
Last year on one of our properties, in the leased property, I think there was 15,800 lambs come in on grazing canola. We forward sold all those lambs basically before we brought them at $9 for the crossies and $8.80 for the merinos. Had we have not forward sold them, we would have done that trade and made absolutely bugger all out of it, because that market quickly come back to about $7.60 to $7.80.
Yep.
And we would have done that just for the fun of it had they not been forward sold.
Yep.
What put the cream on the cake was rapid weight gain. And that was a bit of an insight there. We had one particular mob of lambs that come here and did absolutely bugger all on the best feed you could ever put into them. And what crappy genetics cost us in that trade was just staggering. And I did a bit of a trace back and found out what their genetics were, and they come from homebred rams.
Yep.
So, yeah, what you manage for is what you get. If you want to really put the screws on price, then I wish you luck.
Yeah, fair call. Okay, so let's go back to the business. We've got the stud operation. You do the thing that's come into your business is this trading, and you talk about managing climate change by having a trading business. Again, do you just want to elaborate a bit on that?
So when we did our succession in 2007, the first thing we did was employed a business coach, and he held our hand through change, is a good way of putting what his role was. He, I reckon, indoctrinated the low-hanging fruit into our business and created a different culture. And one of the things he kept nagging us with, Nigel, you make really good money in the average years to above average, and then you tear it up in the bad years. Why don't you develop a system where the bad years don't hurt you? It's not as if we're going to make money in the bad years, just make sure we don't lose it. And that was because we were 100% breeding, and that's all I knew. But as things went, we chose to start, when animals become too dear to own, too dear to buy, that means they're too dear to own.
Okay.
So we started selling down a lot of our breeding ewes at the top of markets when they got there.
Yep.
And through the use of grazing charts, which we've had grazing charts now for 15 years, so there's massive history there in those, and all the good things we've done and some of the horrible things we've done with managing climate are all graphed on grazing charts.
Yep.
So slowly we entered into the world of any excess feed we have, we could sell that to a trading component. And we were lucky where we had basically a tar road run up the middle of our farm, and the stud was on one side of that road, and we had facilities on the other half of our place in the leased property and another property at Yeovil to run trade animals. So the biosecurity part of it was right. It just created a relief valve for climate. But that started in 2007, and let me tell you, the model we use now for trading compared to 2007 is so different. 2007, we weren't talking about forward sales. We were talking highest price, blew your hair back. Now we just talk about margin. So the actual marketing system we use, or trading system we use, it's really, I remember we had to update trading policies. So we one of the things with our business coach, he made us blueprint our property, one-page plan for everything we did. And I'll never forget that blueprint for trading was basically getting updated every 6 and 8 weeks. And it was updated with what went well, what could have been better with each trade. And we kept making that policy blueprint stronger and stronger by good things we did and stupid things we did. And one of the big things that come out of all the stupid things we done where we mightn't have made much money or we lost money was if that happened, you could bet you made a decision based on emotion. Emotions kill businesses. And
so how do you take them out? Because we're emotive people. We're passionate about our business.
Well, you actually learn about, that was another thing with learning. You learn about how you make decisions and how you absolutely sabotage your business life with decisions based on emotion. So if you've made a decision without picking up a pen and paper and a calculator, I can nearly guarantee it's the wrong decision.
Yep.
And if you make a decision, I'm pretty good at making decisions quickly, but the bigger ones, I just know to pause. Just pause and look at the numbers. Pause and look at the numbers. And be aware my biggest enemy is ego. And I have to check that. It's easy to control that in the breeding operation, but in a trading operation, ego is your enemy. Ego and emotion are your enemies.
Can you give an example of what do you mean by that?
I guess it depends on what your personality type is as well. There's Larry Lack and then there's Amanda Abundant. Well, I'm very Amanda Abundant with my thinking. So I'll tend to overcook something before I undercook it.
Yep.
And the big thing is we've learnt with this climate, the secret to our trading business is no matter where you go in Australia, no matter what town it is, you ask them, how many months of the year have you got absolute rocket fuel living in this district? And nearly everywhere you go, they'll say 4 months. So the secret to trading is to get in and out in 4 months.
Yep.
Because everyone can see the feed ahead of them for 4 months. Most good managers can budget out 4 months ahead what feed they got. So one of the criteria to trading is if you can't make a trade work in 4 months, it's highly unlikely you'll make it work at 5, 6, and 7 months. It'll be usually get worse and worse. So one of the things is with forward selling, you're committed and you've got a plan. You've got the price, you're committed, and you manage those animals to meet their weight targets or whatever you're doing.
So you got the grass ahead of you. You can control that. As you say, the one interesting issue is if you're buying in is the thing that you're dependent on is the genetics you're bringing in.
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah.
Genetics now are playing a massively important part to what we now buy. And there's certain animals I won't touch because I just can't get them to perform for free. They perform to a certain level, but there's no free lunch in their performance. And that's a good way of describing a merino bred with data that has good parentage, where you look at the accuracy of their data is high compared to one that has low accuracies.
Yep.
And genomics has changed all that very much so.
So on a per DSE basis, would you breeding versus trading, is it about 50-50 or how's it sit in an average year?
It's about 50-50.
Yep.
And that started off as 80% breeding, 20% trading. And guess what's kept it'll be different in nearly every climate.
Yep.
But for us, that's just where we found the level of being able to manage climate.
Because your driver is grass. I mean, that's the reality. Is what your simple your business is. How do I maximize my dollar value from the grass I grow, and knowing that I've got a potentially a variable source of dollars.
Yeah. Like this season, if I look at the photos on my phone of this time last year, lower rainfall than this year, the amount of difference in this season to last season, we've had another 300 odd mils of rain, rolling rainfall, more than this time last year.
Mm.
And they are chalk and cheese.
Yep.
There would be at least 60% difference in the grass we've grown this autumn compared to last autumn.
Yeah, because interesting. I just remembered something that resonated from me that you talked about was talking to croppers and about how after 1 year's drought, for instance, that they can get themselves back in prepare their balance sheets in 1 year, and for a livestock operation, especially a breeding operation, we can't do that.
Mm.
And it made you think about, well, actually, maybe it's our system that we need to think about, that we can actually create a system that allows us to repair our balance sheet quicker.
Yeah, balance sheet repairs was pretty bloody important for everyone in Central West New South Wales, especially west of the Newell Highway. And there was a lot of croppers that I talked to and also made contact with on Twitter were saying their businesses, they got their balance sheet back to where it was at the beginning of, say, 2018 in one harvest, which is an absolutely fantastic effort.
Yep.
And the question they asked me is, can you do the same with livestock? And at the time, I didn't have a clue because I needed to actually finish a trade that we were doing to answer that question. And the answer is yes, you can. But where I see the biggest blockage in the livestock game at the moment is if you travel right through the Central West, and even including the district I live in, which I consider incredibly safe, you're seeing landscapes that are moribund cellulose feed. Where the drought broke basically in the Central West in March last year, and there's still been paddocks that basically haven't had animals on them.
Because they don't have the stock.
They don't have the stock to do it. And you ask, well, you can use finance as an excuse. But my God, there's still ways of getting finance now that get you back in business. And I can do a spreadsheet and put interest rate in at 20%, still make money.
Yep.
I've done it heaps of times. Put interest in at 40%, 40% interest bill. You're still making money because you're doing a 4-month trade. You haven't got the money borrowed for 12 months. It's in and out in 4 months.
Yep.
So,
and as it costs, the reality is when people, you look at the interest rates, let's say it's 5, 4, whatever, 3, 2 maybe, you're getting the interest cost as part of your costs in doing that trade are bugger all.
Even if you're looking at interest rates at 12 and 14%, doing a trade where you've got the forward price there to cover the risk, it's incredibly cheap. And I rewind it because you've got to rewind yourself back to where you were and where you started your business in 2007.
Yep.
Would we have been having this confident conversation about today's prices with the mindset that I had or Kate had back in 2007? Would we have been as shy as a lot of people have been with restocking at these record prices if we were in 2007? The answer is absolutely we'd have been as shy.
Yep.
Would we have done what everyone else has done? More than likely. What was the difference between where we are now and where we were in 2007? And the difference is education.
Yep.
It's learning.
And I think, education and learning. I think sometimes we think about education as something someone does on a whiteboard and you sit there and take notes. Well, that's not education. What you're saying is you've learned from, let's call it hands-on experience, about what works and what doesn't work.
Yeah, and just reporting that in your monthly reporting you had to do back to your business coach with your P&L cash flow and your P&L, what went well for the month, what could have been better. Then he'd dig into that, and then you had to write policies on everything you did.
Yep.
All you were doing was systemizing a business.
Yep.
And I now call that, we were learning how to flip burgers.
Yep.
If I go to work at McDonald's, I have to flip burgers a certain way. And it's the same in business, no matter whether I'm a city, town-based, farm-based businesses. They all have the same structure of success. It doesn't change.
And you see it in footy teams. Don't care what your code is.
Yeah.
What do they keep on talking about? We believe in the system. We trust the system. We've got a process. You know, again, I was just reading someone who's who's into the lean management, and she uses the All Blacks as a classic example. They said, why are they successful for so long? They say we've got a system, we've got a process, and we've got a culture.
Yep.
It's got nothing to do with they play rugby or not. It's you can use those across any business, I would have thought.
The other big word starts with A, accountability. Who are you accountable to?
Yep.
And if you've got a business coach or a board or something like that, you're accountable to someone and you've got to toe the line.
Yeah, I was just
what's wrong with that?
I was talking to the students about that very thing yesterday, Nigel.
Accountability. Like, what team do you get to play in that's successful, that doesn't have a coach that makes you accountable to the rest of the team?
Yep.
If you want to be great at anything, it usually has to involve someone holding your hand, keeping you accountable.
Well, why is it that you often hear people, and it's interesting in business, and I used to talk about this when I was working at the NAB as well. You know, when we were trying a new system, no one was prepared to practice. It was sort of like you didn't do that in business. And I say, well, hang on, do you play footy or cricket or netball or whatever? And they say, yeah. I said, how often do you train a week? Or at least 3 times. So why is it that you're happy to learn in the game, in your work, but within your sporting life, you appreciate the importance of training? Now, we might hate it, but we know that it's important that if we train as a team, we're going to play as a team. Yet we don't do that in business. Why is that?
If there is no accountability, then you ask me who's going to keep you accountable.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that I really enjoy doing with clients is just plant seeds. Plant seeds, come back, water them, come back, fertilise them, and keep planting seeds. And a really good example of that was we had a client last year who joined ewe lambs for the first time. He did everything his way and didn't ask the coach about it. He got 32% in a brilliant season. This year, he went to do it again and he said, right, what have I got to do to make this incredibly successful? I said, it's basically a 5-step process. From the day that ewe lamb is conceived in utero to the day she's joined, these are the steps we've got to go through.
Yep.
This year, that same bloke scanned 85% in his ewe lambs out of 3,000 ewe lambs, joined in one mob.
And again, just
have a look at the low-hanging fruit that come out of that hand-holding.
And just think of the dollars that are sitting there for him to take advantage of.
3,000 ewes were joined in one mob, 85% in lamb, and it was a combination of genetics as well as, the most important thing, management. So when we go back to the beginning of the conversation and you look at the low-hanging fruit and you look at the focus on direct cost compared to the focus on turnover, it's that CEO, when he gets out of bed of a morning, puts on the CEO's hat when he jumps in the Hilux ute, that creates that mental change in the way that he looks at that business. And I have a one-liner that's so important that come from a bloke I greatly respect in agriculture. The more people I employ, the more money I make, because it allows me to be the CEO of this business where I find the low-hanging fruit. And that's what happened in this case. It was a brilliant result created by someone saying, for God's sake, you can't run this many DSEs with yourself and one other bloke.
Nigel, I reckon that's a really good place to end this. A couple of things I want to say to the audience. One of the things that I enjoy about Nigel is he's very active on Twitter. So if you are on Twitter, can I highly recommend that you look for Kerin Poll, because I find it very useful in my day-to-day thinking. The other thing that I find fascinating is that is it an annual review, Nigel, that you do?
Yeah, we've actually started building that today.
Yeah.
I think it was 50 odd pages last year, and this year it'll be bigger than that. But it's called the Kerin Poll this year is obviously 2021 review.
Yeah.
And guess what we don't talk about?
Rams.
It's not a single thing. It's all about my love of agriculture and the love of putting into writing what I've learned in the last 12 months.
Yeah, and I think, again, for anyone who's interested in the business of agriculture, I can highly recommend it as a great read. It's not hard, and there's some really good home truth and some fantastic quotes in there. So thank you for today, Nigel.
Yeah, thank you. And if anyone wants copies of the last year's, it's still here. It's still good reading. It doesn't outdate. It's just stories on what makes things work better. Active on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, but it's all about farming and numbers and ideas. It's not about photos of dogs and all that sort of stuff. Yeah, so keep an eye on Kerin Poll Merino. You'll find it on those free channels. Thank you for your time, David, and I am sure we can come up with some more good topics between the pair of us in the future.
Mate, always up for a chat. Thanks for listening to this week's Marcus AgTalk podcast. Please, any feedback on the series would be greatly appreciated. You can either leave a message on this site or email me at cornish@marcusoldham.vic.edu.au. Stay tuned to next week's podcast as we continue to explore farm management from an Australian perspective.